Hello all, welcome to the third episode of Ask Charles. Before we get started, as usual, I'm going to do my disclaimer. Anything you hear today is just for informational purposes only. Should you need specific guidance about your particular tax situation, you should go and speak with an attorney. I would prefer, of course, that you come to my office. Shameless plug, but if you're going to do anything based off what you hear here today, again, you should go and talk to an attorney so that you can have some really good legal advice based off your specific factual situation and not just a generalized question like you're going to hear today. Of course, what we have going on today does not create any attorney-client privilege of any sort. And so with all the disclaimers out of the way, let's get started. The first question it says, "Hey Charles, what's the benefits of an LLC over an S corporation as a small business owner?" I think we probably should first start off with what we're talking about when we talk about an LLC versus an S corporation. Really, both of those entities are more for asset protection, liability protection measures. You are engaged in an inherently risky business. Someone may sue you because you're a truck driver. You run over somebody while you're driving your truck. Instead of you getting sued personally, state law generally requires that the LLC and/or corporation be sued, therefore insulating you and your personal assets from any liability. So that's generally the biggest advantage to having either of these two forms. Both of these two forms are essentially pass through when you talk about taxation issues, which means the owners pay the tax on the profits of the entity. One of the main differences between an S-Corp and an LLC, an S-Corp can pay its shareholders who are also employees a wage, a check every week, and the S-Corp would then be required to withhold any taxes due to the government and submit those on the shareholders and employees' behalf. With an LLC, you can only take a draw. There's no withholding that's done. So I liken that to having, these things when you go to a restaurant and they say, "Hey, you can have this 5-pound steak if you can eat it in 50 minutes. You're probably not going to be able to eat that 5-pound steak in 50 minutes. It's all a setup to get you to buy a $100 steak. Long story short, don't wait to the end of the year to pay all the taxes that's due when you're in an LLC format. You still have an obligation to pay on as-you-go basis, which means you should be making at least quarterly estimated tax payments. Other than that, on a choice of entity considerations, the governance and management of an LLC versus an S corporation. The S corporation is a corporate form, so it can be a bit more complex than an LLC. So if you're looking for simplicity and you're trying to make a decision between the LLC and the S corp, you probably want to go the LLC to start. Again, to be clear, the LLC to start. There's this thing called conversion, where you can always convert one entity to the other, so long that it's feasible for you to do it, so forth and so on. With an S-Corp, however, if you elect to get out of an S-Corp, there are certain time limits before you can get back in to one. So again, just like we said when we first started, you want to go and speak with an attorney to determine what your specific factual situation might dictate, so that then you can take on some actionable steps from there. So with that, we'll move to our second question. What we're talking about here is the first-time penalty abatement and how does that work with the Internal Revenue Service. So penalty abatement in general is available to taxpayers on two bases. First, the one that's specifically being asked about here is the first-time penalty abatement. And then there's also another called reasonable cause for abatement of a penalty. Because you didn't ask for reasonable cause, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it. So under reasonable cause, it essentially boils down to you had some sort of reason for why you were unable to meet your tax filing obligations. You got hit by a car. You were in the hospital when April 15th or October 15th rolled around. You obviously couldn't file your tax at that time. You have reasonable cause for why you couldn't do that. There's a number of factors that the IRS will consider: death of a close family member, your injury, a number of factors. Again, go and speak with an attorney about your specific fact situation if you're going to make a penalty abatement request based on reasonable cause. Back to the question that you asked me, which is about the first time penalty abatement. The first time penalty abatement is essentially an award for good tax compliance history. So let's say that I have a client who walks into my office and they say, hey, I want to get this penalty abated for my 2017 taxes. What I would have to do as a practitioner would be to request your tax transcripts from the Internal Revenue Service. Once I got your tax transcripts from the Internal Revenue Service, what I'm going to be looking for is whether or not you had any failure to pay, failure to file, or failure to make estimated tax payment penalties assessed to you in either of the 3 preceding years. We're in 2017, that means 16, 15, 14. I look at 16, 15, and 14. I don't see any other penalties. I'm going to file a Form 843, which is a request to abate your penalty on a first-time penalty abatement basis. Sometimes the IRS comes back and denies it on a reasonable cause basis. Then you just got to clear up that issue. I didn't ask for a reasonable cause penalty abatement. I asked for a first-time penalty abatement on the basis of good tax compliance, and you should get that on the appeal of an initial denial should one happen. So that kind of gets us done on our third episode of Ask Charles. Again, if you have a question for us, leave it in the comments. Leave your questions. You can actually, I think, also send us questions via private messenger on our Facebook page. I can understand the apprehension that one might have about putting out hey, I'm in a bad tax situation. So you don't have to do that. Send us a private message. We'll make sure we don't refer to your name specifically, so forth and so on. But if you've got a question for us about a tax situation, maybe others do as well, and we'd like to help you. So until the next time, Ask Charles.